Week 3, several added takeaways from Week 3 in college football on top of what we've already talked about. How about Clemson, 14-8 over Georgia Tech? I got to tell you, it felt a bit surreal for me to turn this game on in the Penn State press box yesterday and catch the ending of it and watch Clemson. You almost think you're looking at an optical illusion. Is this like a spring game? What am I looking at here? So I got Clemson backed up against their own goal line. Oh, they don't have the ball. Georgia Tech's got the ball. Clemson is having to put forth a goal line stand to keep the Jackets from going ahead at the end of the regulation. I mean, they could win the game. And I'm looking, and Director Collin put it more directly than any of us could before the show tonight. Clemson scored half the amount of points they were favored by. They still won the game. They hung 14. They won the game. They were favored by 28. I'm about to read you a stat that I saw written earlier today. I can't remember where I saw it. This is mind-boggling. Out of all the teams in the ACC, Clemson has the lowest yards per play of any of them. They are the worst offense in the conference in terms of yards per play. They are 122nd in the nation. There's only 130 teams at last check, some odd, in terms of yards per play. When they lost to Georgia, I came on the show the following night, and I said, all I heard last night was, well, Clemson's got to get a lot fixed before the playoff. And there was just this assumption, well, they're going to win every other game. They'll be favored, so they'll win every other game. Again, listen to that on the podcast, or you're watching on YouTube. That's paper. Games aren't played on it. If they were, this would have been a runaway. They're not. Some of the same issues that we watched plague Clemson in Week 1 that we thought was just because of a dominant Georgia defense, maybe it wasn't just because of a dominant Georgia defense. Maybe this offense is not good. Maybe DJ Uiagalelei is not what he was hyped to be to this point. Now, the reason why I struggle with that concept is because I've got a sneaking suspicion that if I took DJU and I put him in Alabama's offense, I don't think he'd be struggling like this. There are a lot of people out there in the scouting world who think Clemson's offensive approach needs overhauling. Again, that's something above my pay grade. I'm not about to pull the grease board down here because we don't have one. But even if we did, I wouldn't do it. But I'm just telling you, that's the talk. Kind of behind the water cooler, kind of behind the curtain. That's the talk. And again, the anecdotal evidence would lead you to believe, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Clemson wins. They go to NC State this week. They're favored by just under 2 touchdowns. They got to score more than 14 to cover. I pretty much know that. Wake Forest just ran all over Florida State yesterday, 35-14 the final. This was a woodshedding. So Wake had 166 more total yards. They ran 38 more plays than did Florida State. 38. They had 12 more first downs. Why? Well, half a dozen turnovers probably had something to do with it from Florida State. And so when we came into this year, granted it was a long shot, I acknowledge that, but we had some fringe hope that maybe there'd be some magic with McKenzie Milton, and that only got exclamated in Week 1 when they almost beat Notre Dame, and it has been downhill since then. You lose to Jacksonville State, you get thrashed by Wake Forest, and now, I mean, we're looking at Miami and we're asking these questions, we're looking at Florida State and we're asking these questions, and all the while, if you're the rest of college football, knowing how pivotal it would be for balancing out the sport long-term in recruiting for those two to get right, you just have to look and you have to shake your head. I know I do. And I know Florida State fans and Miami fans do. How about Ohio State? You look at the final score, 41-20. That's not bad. Well, if you go over to Bucknuts, they would disagree. If you talk to any of your resident Buckeye fans, they would probably disagree. Now, Travion Henderson didn't care. He set a new record for Ohio State. Total yards rushing in a game, 277. He topped a guy, Archie something, can't remember. I'm told he was pretty good there, though. So that was a good thing for Travion Henderson. However, we talked last week about how there would be defensive changes at Ohio State, and there were. Kerry Combs was not announced as being demoted, but yet there he was, Matt Barnes calling plays for him yesterday. Kerry Combs up in the box, Matt Barnes down on the field. The problem was the changes turned out to be more cosmetic than anything, because all Ohio State did, as we told you last week when changes happen in season, was simplify. And the problem was it got simplified to the point where Tulsa figured out how to hang 500 total yards of offense on them. They had 428 yards passing, did Tulsa. All is not lost here for Ohio State. There are teams, as I've said before already on this show, there are teams every year that have a lot of talent that do not perform to the level of that collective talent early in the year. Clemson's done this before. They're hoping to do it this year. And then they eventually hit a stride. Ohio State, unlike some teams whose potential is already capped, Ohio State could hockey stick this thing. I know it's hard to see right now. It always is. That's the point of someone surprising you. But Ryan Day and his staff, they've got to go to work. They've got to do a great coaching job. That's it. The hallmark of what ends up being a really good team is it improves week over week. And right now you're not seeing the improvement. That's not a good thing. There is good news, and that is the season is still very young. And Ohio State is, well, obviously they're undefeated in conference play, but they've still got everything in front of them. Everything they wanted to accomplish theoretically is still in front of them. But man, it's got to start hockey sticking. It's got to start elevating eventually. Oklahoma struggled mightily with Nebraska yesterday. It was the fewest total Oklahoma points in a win since 2013. 23-16 was the final. I got an Oklahoma buddy who hits me up regularly during games. I normally leave him alone because nothing good comes from talking about the game during the game. But after, he wanted to talk about the offense. And here's the best way I can sum it up. For anyone who hasn't watched Oklahoma or didn't see this game yesterday, it's like watching a long drive specialist walk onto a golf course and not be able to sink a 5-foot putt to save his life. Oklahoma, it's all they want to do. They want to blast you over the top. But the problem is defensive coordinators are wise to it, and they can't take advantage of favorable boxes underneath, and they can't take advantage of loose coverage underneath. There's no consistent ground and pound. There's no consistent underneath route techniques or anything like that. Concepts, not techniques. And so they just essentially get Barry Odom'd to death. This is what Barry Odom does at Arkansas all the time. And that's what happened with Nebraska yesterday. And that's how an offense that should be explosive hangs 23 total points. Again, that is up to a coaching staff to fix, because you're never going to look at me if you're Oklahoma and you're never going to say, well, yeah, I know how to fix it, but we don't have the pieces to fix it. Nope, that's not going to work. That's not, because there's someone out there this year, there's someone out there this week that's doing far more with far less. So that's not going to fly. But they did win, and that's the important part. North Carolina had a very underrated big win yesterday. North Carolina 59, Virginia 39. This was pivotal. Unlike some of these teams who have lost already, North Carolina's lost a conference game. If they would have fallen to 0-2 in conference yesterday, and they were only favored by 7 or 8 once this game kicked off, that would have been no bueno. That would have been bad, bad news. And they trailed at halftime of this thing, but they won the second half to the tune of 35-11. And I want to read you a quote. You know I love bulletin board material. I say that sarcastically, but hey, when it works, it works. So these words came from the mouth of Virginia defensive lineman Mandy Alonzo this week. Quote, "They always try to come physical. It's our culture versus theirs. We're going to go harder, longer each play and the whole game than they will. Even if they come out swinging, we just have to be able to sustain it, and we know they can't sustain it because the past 4 years, they haven't been able to." North Carolina proceeded to hang 59 points. They proceeded to run for like half a mile. Our guy Ty Chandler had nearly 200 on the ground and a couple of scores. Suffice it to say, the Tar Heels sustained against Virginia and then some yesterday. And I want to point out, you have looked around the rest of the landscape of college football. This is not a land of giants this year. It's a land of taller and still pretty tall, and if I jump, I can still reach you. It's that kind of year this year. A lot of folks can be had. And so there's going to be a team who is left for dead early in the year and ends up grabbing a playoff spot. It's going to happen. I can already tell you. It's either going to happen or they're going to push someone to the very brink, and they're going to be a factor, a mainstay in that playoff conversation. Right now, North Carolina's been left for dead. You didn't watch this game in all likelihood yesterday. You watched them in week 1. They couldn't move the ball against Virginia Tech. They couldn't do anything. And you said, there goes North Carolina with 3.5 more months of football to play. You dismissed a team that's very talented. Well, I didn't. I was disappointed in week 1, but I didn't dismiss them. And so just give them a little time. You never know. Crazy sport, this college football. So someone's going to be left for dead, and they're going to make it. Why not North Carolina? And lastly, speaking of making it, anyone see Cincinnati yesterday? Indiana did. Cincinnati wins 38-24. Michael Penix for Indiana, 3 more interceptions. It is a chronic issue at this point. It is what Indiana offense has become known for, and that's not a good thing because otherwise, you look at the box score, this was an evenly played game. It's just being -2 turnovers is usually going to end poorly for you. I've said this repeatedly since the summer. I'm going to say it again even more emphatically. You guys are making it a lot more complicated than you need to with Cincinnati. I am telling you, whether you want to believe it right now or not, it is very basic. If this team wins out, they're going to be in the playoff. That's as far as I'm going to talk about playoff in September. A lot of you still think 14 different things need to fall perfectly in line, and this tumbler has to go here, and that team's got to lose 2 games. It's a different world. 7 years worth of wisdom on how this playoff format works is working against you because the status quo has changed. The perception of the American Athletic Conference has changed. This team started preseason top 10. They were already in the conversation. They're not having to work their way into it. They've got an established track record. If Cincinnati wins out, they're going to be in the playoff. That's independent of whatever happens out there elsewhere. I've already seen enough. And I've already seen teams that have lost struggle mightily against inferior competition that they end up beating. There are not going to be these hurdles of resumes that Cincinnati can't overcome this year. It's a different format. It's a different landscape. So I know you'll have to see it to believe it. You know I don't beat the G5 drum by any stretch, but it doesn't matter what I root for to happen. That's going to happen. If they win out, that's going to happen.